Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rosini, the co-host. Chris, nice to have you with us.
Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Good. The big thing in the news right now obviously has to do with Trump and whether or not he should and can declare a national emergency. I mean, he wants a wall and the Democrats don't want a wall. Has nothing to do with national security as far as I'm concerned, because I think it's all politics, and because if we were really seriously thinking about a wall, the Democrats should be jumping up and down. They have voted maybe more money for the wall than ever before, but now they've been embarrassed with the last election, and Trump didn't treat them with kid gloves, so they hate Trump with all their might. So therefore, they have to punish him and not let him have the wall that they wanted all along. So, but they have to, and Trump's, in a bind. How do I get this wall? I talked it up, and maybe I can declare an emergency, and that's the big thing going on now. Should Trump declare a national emergency to get this wall on and get this government opened up? But my reaction on the close down of government, today it said that some people might not get their check for this, free holiday they had. They had to work and they have a holiday and they're going to get all their money. But whether it's going to be today or tomorrow, or the next day, it's a big deal, and it's played out the most terrible thing that could ever happen. But I think one thing it proves is most of the people in this country haven't even noticed and probably don't care that much, other than for the politics of it. And that's why they jump at it when they think of, the Democrats trying to embarrass the president. But probably in all this and listening to Trump, and the other night I thought he did a job in pointing out the hypocrisy, of Schumer and Pelosi, because they had a record of voting for a lot of money for the wall, and all of a sudden, oh no, it's immoral to have this wall. Such hypocrisy. It's sickening, to tell you the truth. But of course, I've never been a big champion of the wall. I think we should have barriers, and we should work it out one way or another to the best way we can do it. But to think that we're going, even if they had the money today, to think that we're going to have this wall from the Gulf all the way over to the Pacific, that's going to take years and years. And even Trump now is admitting, well, there's some spots there we don't really need it. Of course, we don't need it. And I've taken a different approach to it, even though I'm not opposed to any effort at all. But the one thing that has been pointed out, and it should catch the attention of Republicans, and it has caught the attention of the congressmen along the border, and that is eminent domain. How do they do this? Should we say, oh, well, this is national security, just let the government take over and build a wall? But no, there'll be lots of lawsuits, and it will go on. The one thing that I've never heard anybody discuss, probably because there's not much of a leeway there, but what's happened to the principle of no trespassing? I used to think that if you put your sign up, no trespassing, you could put a pretty big dog in there and actually do a little bit of protection. But nobody ever talks about that, because I'm sure there are strict limitations on what a property owner can do in enforcing the law. Technically, if you have a no trespassing sign up, you're supposed to call the police, and the police will come and take care of the person who's trespassing, which is not exactly the practical way of handling the border. But it is a big deal, and today or tomorrow, the next day, we'll probably hear if there's going to be a national emergency, which once again will be a superficial answer to a problem that isn't nearly what they claim it is. I don't believe for a second that if we don't have the wall funding in the next day or two, that our national security is going to be endangered. I don't think we're quite there. At the same time, we can't ignore our borders, and I've written about what I think should be done, but I don't think the wall is a solution. So I'm hoping that the political atmosphere can change, because this is probably 99% political, and I think this allows the media and everybody else, the Republicans and Democrats, who's going to be blamed. That's what's going on. It's not can we afford it. The money doesn't even come up, and we're wasting tens of, not hundreds, of billions of dollars elsewhere. So the money can't possibly be the issue. It all has to do with political problems, and I think that in a way, I think the Democrats still can't get over the fact that Hillary lost.
Yes, Dr. Paul, I agree. And for all of our viewers out there that value the freedoms that they have left, the two words that you never want to hear from government are national emergency. I mean, government is always inch by inch taking away our liberties on a daily basis, and it's bad enough on a normal day. But when they use national emergency, those inches turn into yards. And that's, the ears perk up of all the bad actors out there who can't get done what they want in a normal day. But when they hear national emergency, that opens the door for them. And, so that's why I don't support any national emergency. And I hear now, I'm reading this morning, that Democrats are starting to warm up to the idea. And perhaps they're thinking that, well, maybe when they're in power, if they could declare a national emergency for a wall, you could declare it for whatever you want. So national emergency should definitely be shot down in my book.
Yeah, and I think this is the important principle in this whole debate is instead of figuring out how to get around some political obstruction, we should be talking more about the principle of declaring national emergencies. They've been doing it for many, many years. I mean, our president all the way back to Lincoln, emergency, and they'd break the law, and that's been notorious that the executive branch is always overreaching, and the Congress has generally been complicit. They either allow it or go along with it. I mean, just think about how we get into wars. That's a big deal. And the presidents do this just on declaration. And, oh, yeah, there's an emergency. The National Emergency Act was passed in 1976. And when you read that, you find out that if you can get a consensus, there are some political controls on this, because although a president can become a virtual dictator through that law, it's not going to happen whether it's Republican or Democrats. There will be some resistance, but the law says that he can be. So you could see where, let's say 9/11 was a lot worse than it was. I could see the people saying, well, get us a dictator to get us a dictator. It's terrible that they've already conceded it. They don't really, all you have to do is get that emergency declared, and then the president can do it. You don't have to go back to the Congress to tell him what he's allowed to do. And since that time, currently, right now, there are 14 declarations of emergency, and they're overseas. There's a lot more than that's going on, but there are 14 with countries like Cuba and Syria and Ukraine and all these, because they want to use all this financial pressure to manipulate the foreign policy to protect our empire. So that's it's existing already, and that is where the real abuse is that it allows the executive branch to gain so much power that they have, and it's ongoing. But that still doesn't bother anybody. The reason this one is like I said in my opening statement, it's all politics. They have to embarrass the president, and they hate the president, so they go through all this. So I don't think it has much to do with national security, although some valid points are made. I think it's just a lot about politics, and there's some other things. With the amount of money we spend on national security, supposedly, we have enough, $770 billion, and we're worrying about building the wall for our security, when all we do is spend about $700 billion overseas worrying about borders in the Middle East and around the world, and who's in charge, and orchestrating coups and all these other things in the name of national security. So the money is overwhelming. It's the way they spend it, and that's why I think we may be jeopardized, is because they don't even know what national defense really means in defending our country. They think national defense means maintaining our empire. And just look at what's going on now, the debate when Trump said, and I strongly favor, bring the troops home from Syria. Then all of a sudden, his staff's out there saying, "Oh, we don't really mean that." This sort of thing. It's not precise enough. Bringing the troops home would be fine. Why? If they were serious about this, And even if you weren't gung-ho over the wall, why couldn't you say, well, $770 billion, that's too much. Let's cut $100 billion out of mischief overseas, take it and give about $50 billion on the national debt, and use the $50 billion here and concede a wall or whatever they want. It would be, I had a cliche that I used to use, if you have a choice of wasting money overseas or wasting money here at home, I'd say waste it here at home, put it even into the welfare state, if you could just get out of the mischief of all these wars that we're fighting overseas.
Yes, and Dr. Paul, I wanted to bring up a point that you've been mentioning on the major networks recently these last few weeks, but nobody is willing to talk about it, and that's the welfare state and how welfare acts as a magnet for illegals to come here. And it really boils down to human nature. We want things and we want them right now. And government knows this about human nature and they exploit it. So they figured out if they could take money from one person and give it for quote unquote free to another, the person they're giving to, they're going to want it. And it's worked in America.
Yeah.
50% of people are on some kind of federal assistance. And it's not a safety net, it's a way of life now. So that's how it works for illegal immigrants. If they would just take away that welfare magnet, the desire for many people to come here would go away.
They're using the argument now, the Democrats are using the argument against Trump that building a wall is immoral. It's not immoral because they're taking money from one group and giving it to another or whatever. It's immoral even though they supported the war. But if they're using that as the excuse, walls are immoral, what do you think they would say if we said, well, it's immoral to take money from hardworking Americans to feed and clothe and educate and give medical care and education to somebody who broke our laws and came here illegally? They would say, well, it's immoral not to take care of them. Well, if they marched into their house, does that mean you have to take care of them? Yeah, and under socialism and communism, that is the case. But even the people who are promoting this don't expect these illegals to march onto their property, mainly because their property is usually gated and they are protected. But they're claiming that that it would be obviously immoral. I think it's immoral to steal this money and transfer it around. But there's so much it goes on in a relative sense on what the government does, on its own. I said there's a lot of executive orders and emergency orders, and we know about most of them. But what I've come to worry about are the ones that aren't even out in the open. They don't even admit, because what we're talking about is minuscule when it comes to the amount of control and political power and financial control that our monetary system has. In the Great Recession, there was like $15 trillion transferred hands, bailing out, banks and big corporations and foreign governments, and it didn't go through a process, a budgetary process. So those are the kind of money. So when they argue with Trump, and I don't think if he builds a wall, I don't endorse the idea, well, just take the money from someplace else. But if he did, that would be minuscule compared to what they have, done elsewhere with the monetary system. But there is so much power, in the system. If you look at the judicial system, how out of control that is when you have the CIA and the FBI supposed to protect us, and I think that they do really the opposite. And our First Amendment rights being abused. These things are totally ignored. At the same time, the people are arguing, well, we can't build a wall, because it's immoral. But I think what they're recognizing is that the system is very fragile, very friable. The welfare state, has driven us to this point, and they're arguing over things. And other people say, well, one of my positions has been to give no welfare benefits to illegals. I don't think they should come in. And I told the story the other day that in the emergency room, I remember delivering a baby for an illegal that came in, and she was quickly assisted by hospital personnel in how to get to the courthouse and sign up for food stamps and the rest. So that is the part that I don't think is fair. And they say, well, what would you do? Would you have a national ID card? No. But I would say that you have to identify yourself. This whole idea because I think getting new voters in here is a big deal. Why shouldn't somebody who's voting use an ID card? We all do, all Americans. At least we show a driver's license or a voter card or something. Oh no, that would be immoral. That would be discriminatory. That means you're a bigot if everybody has to show it. But you know, I got to thinking that the most benign thing that I don't know whether they still do it, but I knew it was the case when our kids were smaller. If they wanted to play Little League Baseball, we had to take a copy of our birth certificate to show that the age was correct. And, you know, so the big deal. I figured, well, it would be unfair if somebody, lied about their age. So this whole idea that you have to have a national ID card for every single person in this country, but if you sign up to vote, I think you should be able to, identify yourself. If you're signing up with food stamps because you're taking something from somebody else through the transfer process of the government, they should at least tell the government who they are. But no, matter of fact, that is an insult, and it's considered discrimination and hateful to actually identify. And I got to thinking, you know, what would it be like if the average American decided, you know, I think it'd be neat to live in Japan. And I'm going to go over to Japan. I'm going to walk in and say, where do I sign up for food stamps? And my kids can't speak Japanese, so who will teach them how to speak Japanese? Are you going to have a special teacher when they go to school to teach them, and they teach the language? And on and on. You know, nobody would do that. Most countries would just laugh at us. And yet we get accused of being immoral and outrageous, the fact that we say, well, we ask a question. Oh no, you're not even allowed to ask a question. So, and that is going to bring us to our knees. So the welfare, the subject that you brought up, Chris, is a big deal. But the other big one is the military-industrial complex and the financial system through the Federal Reserve. And that's what will bring us to our knees. Maybe we'll get a chance to reform the system and come up with an improvement, or at least a reversal to something more constitutional.
I agree. I hope so, Dr. Paul. And I'll finish, because I value liberty, my impression of the government shutdown is a lot different than, let's say, the media. You know, when I read that 800,000 people are not getting their paychecks or whatever, my thought is, why on earth does the federal government have 800,000 people? Could you imagine going to Thomas Jefferson and saying, 800,000 people aren't getting paid? We gave you a limited government. Why do you have all these people? Oh no, Mr. Jefferson, there's millions more. This is just a partial shutdown. So he would be disgusted, and he'd probably point to the Declaration of Independence, where it says he, King George III, has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Isn't that what has happened in America, Dr. Paul?
Oh, that's for sure. And these 800,000 people, we're hearing from them. But, we're not hearing so much from people who are concerned about loss of services that they provide. I don't think they're hardly even noticed. But I did see something, I don't know whether this was a final thing, but Treasury was going to be reopened, and the IRS was going to be reopened too. We can't have the taxing authorities, go on leave forever. We have to keep them going. But, the 800,000, I think that they're called non-essential, so that's why they can do it. Well, maybe we could put them on furlough without pay. Of course, now that's becoming immoral and really subject to severe criticism. Because, I think, cutting back anything, people would be hysterical if you cut back the militarism of our country. They'd be hysterical if you cut back on food stamps for the poor. And I think that we should make an effort always to cut foreign entanglements and militarism and have a transition and take care of the people who become dependent. But if the financial crisis hit, or when it hits, believe me, there will be no discrimination. Everybody's going to suffer the consequences, and it won't be like, oh well, we'll just print more money, that'll be gone. So it is a serious problem, but I tell you what, this debate over the wall and whether about the shutdown is not addressing the subject. I'd like people to pay more attention to the subject of emergency powers. We have way too much power there in Washington already. If any president can go to war, which so many have, without even the Congress and the people being involved in, then it's a serious problem. So I hope people would pay more attention to that. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please return soon.